Some weeks ago, Vendell Jones made the claim that he was going to find the Ark of the Covenant before August 14th, that a Kabbalist rabbi in Israel had given him a blessing and the go-ahead to look for it. Since then, of course, the Sanhedrin court has begun a building fund campaign to rebuild the temple. Gary Stearman has written an article for our August magazine entitled, "Is it a Symbol or a Reality? The Tabernacle of David."
An exciting subject, J.R. And Vendell Jones believes that he'll not only find the Ark, and we can talk about that later, but in my mind, much more importantly, he believes he'll find the Tabernacle of David hidden down there. Several rabbis have given him the go-ahead, saying, quote, "The time is right for you to bring this out and expose it to the public." Now, all this is fitting together in a beautiful sequence of events after the formation of the Sanhedrin, the council that has as its primary goal, J.R., to reestablish a Jewish presence on the Temple Mount. This is very exciting.
Yes. Now, according to a WorldNet Daily article, the Sanhedrin, recently reborn after 1,600 years lapse, has headlined its current plans to assemble architects, engineers, and the Sanhedrin has initiated plans that are sure to elevate tensions, writes Gary, tensions among those members of the Arab Waqf and the Palestinian Authority. The article states, the group, which calls itself the Sanhedrin, is calling on the Jewish people to contribute toward the acquisition of materials for the purpose of rebuilding the temple, including the gathering and preparation of a prefabricated, disassembled portions to be stored and ready for rapid assembly in the manner of King David. Kerry, they're preparing for a prefab building.
Yes, they are. And you notice they said, in the manner of King David. That's a direct quote from the letter written by Hillel Weiss, a professor at Hebrew University, and Chaim Richman, who's the head of the Jerusalem Temple Institute, and they have as their goal the establishment of a Davidic presence on the Mount, called in the Bible the Tabernacle of David. Now, we remember the Tabernacle of David because much is made of the time when David brought that tabernacle up to the Mount and placed it there as a home for the Ark of the Covenant. And immediately after he did it, J.R., he was kind of sorry that the Lord is dwelling only in a tent and not in a true temple. But it remained there in that temporary dwelling for a while, which brings us to, I think, some very interesting current events in Scripture, because the Tabernacle of David, that is the ceremony, it's recorded in 1 Chronicles 16, where he brought the tabernacle up, accompanied by great worship and praise and song, is written also in Psalm 105.
Yes. Now, you've got to understand that it was back in 1983 that we first made this discovery, that the Psalms seem to allude to the years numbered according to each Psalm, and certain events would be fulfilled in each of those years. For example, Psalm 17 speaks of the liberation of Jerusalem, which was liberated in 1917. And Psalms 39 through 45 allude to the Holocaust of World War II, and that came to pass in 1939 through 1945. Psalm 48 speaks of the birth of Israel, which was born as a political entity in 1948. So here we come to Psalm 105, and this last January we took note on our program that this is a psalm that dealt with the return of the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Now, whether or not Vendell finds the Ark next month, or this month, or whether or not it is found this year, would be a nice thing for the fulfillment of this psalm. However, the very fact that the Sanhedrin court has been reinstituted and they are now preparing for the temple, the rebuilding of the temple, which would involve bringing up the Ark of the Covenant, fulfills the psalm. This psalm is fulfilled right on schedule.
Right on schedule. And this is fascinating, J.R., because we live in a time when the Arab Waqf, that is the trust which controls the Temple Mountain, that Arab trust will not allow Jews to come up there and do anything other than make a cursory visit. They don't even allow praying. If a Jew is found adopting an attitude of prayer on the Mount, he is ushered off. That's how strict they are right now. Well, I quote from portions of the letter written by the Sanhedrin, and here's a quote. The Sanhedrin will establish a forum of architects and engineers to implement this decision, that is the decision to make plans to place a temple on the mountain. This would be a prefab temple. To implement this decision so that detailed working plans are effectively brought to an operational stage. The Sanhedrin calls upon the Jewish people to contribute towards the acquisition of materials for the purpose of rebuilding the Holy Temple, the gathering of and preparation of prefabricated disassembled portions of this building to be stored and ready for rapid assembly in the manner of King David. That last sentence really, really rings familiar, because they're thinking back to the day that King David came up and established a presence on the mount.
Yes, and then King David began to get all of the materials for the building of the temple. Solomon just assembled this prefab temple, so to speak.
So to speak.
But David got the materials together for the temple. So that's what they're doing at the Jerusalem Institute. Now, Gary wrote the article for our August magazine, and in the front of the article is a picture of our tour group standing here at the Dome of the Spirits, also called the Dome of the Tablets, that's located to the northwest of what you see here as the Dome of the Rock. And so this could be the place where the Tabernacle of David will be set up and a wall built, this prefab temple of sorts, for the tribulation period. Even though Lean Rittmeyer found a place over here under the Dome of the Rock as the place where the Ark of the Covenant once stood, that seems to be out of the question at this point.
Well, J.R., what seems to be out of the question is even going up there to measure. If you went up there with a measuring tape right now, much less a surveyor's transit, you would be quickly escorted off the mountain. The Arabs would have nothing to do with any thought of allowing this to happen. Yes. Nevertheless, the Sanhedrin are going full speed ahead with the project. Do they know something that we don't know? It would seem so.
Well, you know, when the Antichrist arises to power, it's somewhere around that time, whether it's under his auspices or whether he allows it or whether it's done before then, Israel is going to set up some kind of temple on the Temple Mount. A wall will be built to make a separation between the sanctuary and what Ezekiel called the profane place. My thinking is the profane place is the Dome of the Rock.
And many people agree with you on that, by the way. There's a lot of activity and a lot of thought being given to this. J.R., we need to revisit a prophecy. And J.R. and I have sat and talked about this literally for years. And it's still, I think, more fun to talk about than anything in the Bible at the moment. Acts chapter 15, where James gets up and delivers a speech which is also a prophecy. He summons up a prophecy, first written by Amos. He says in Acts 15:14, Simeon hath declared how God at first did visit the Gentiles to take out of them people for his name. And to this agree the words of the prophets, as it is written, after this I will return, will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen down, and I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that the residue of man might seek after the Lord, and all the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith the Lord, who doeth all these things. So when James quoted this in the context of the discussion about Gentiles getting saved, they were having a formative series of discussions, and he quotes this as sort of as a bracket to the church age. He says, at some point up there, the Tabernacle of David is going to be set up, it's going to be patched up, and it's going to be restored. Now, J.R., there's a question among church leaders, depending on their thoughts. A lot of people say the Tabernacle of David is a spiritual metaphor, that it symbolizes worship and praise and prayer and spiritual presence. Others say, no, this is a reference to the real Tabernacle of David, which was stored in the past, and it's going to be brought out and set up again. And here our discussion starts in earnest.
Yes. Vendell Jones says that it's set up in a temple. I'm sorry, in a tunnel.
In a tunnel.
And that the tunnel starts under the Temple Mount and goes all the way out to the Dead Sea. And somewhere in this temple, near the Dead Sea, there is a cavern. And this Tabernacle of David is actually still set up there. Well, we'll tell you about it when we return in just a moment. Well, Vendell Jones has found 40 stones that he claims that the Copper Scrolls tells the whereabouts. And he feels that he is close enough to where he can just drill a hole and drop a camera down in this hole and find the tabernacle. If that happened, Gary, they sure wouldn't want it put in a museum.
Indeed. And by the way, this his dig, and many of you are familiar with this, is at the Cave of the Columns in the vicinity of Qumran. And it's fascinating that during the days of the Romans, when the Romans invaded Israel, a number of people managed to escape, JR, down into that area and then go up to Masada to fight off the Romans. And it is said that a lot of the escapees had an underground method of sneaking past the Roman garrisons. In other words, there's a tunnel that runs all the way from Jerusalem down to the Cave of the Columns. Interestingly, this is on a direct line to the south-southeast, and if you extend that line, it goes over to Mount Nebo, which is a traditional hiding place that's mentioned where the tabernacle was supposedly hidden by Jeremiah. This is a fascinating side note.
Yes. Now let's talk about Jeremiah for a minute, because Vendell Jones claims that Jeremiah and a group of rabbis wrote the Copper Scroll. And the Copper Scroll tells about the whereabouts of tons and tons, hundreds of tons of gold and silver, the temple treasure. And in particular, the first few paragraphs tell the whereabouts of the tabernacle. Give that to us, Gary, as you have it in your article.
Well, I am quoting Vendell Jones from the Copper Scroll, and it's possible that Jeremiah was one of the authors of this scroll, which is unique. There's never been another Copper Scroll found, another metal scroll. It was purportedly written so that it would stand the ages and would be available in the latter days. And reading the Copper Scroll, the Copper Scroll is in the base of the Cave of the Column with two openings, entrances viewing east. In the north opening, viewing eastward. In the hidden opening, dig 3 cubits, and there is the Kalal. Well, that's supposedly the vessel that holds the ashes of the red heifer.
Right.
And then underneath it, that is, underneath this Kalal, is one book, which Vendell Jones says possibly a silver scroll, which is mentioned elsewhere. To the east, dig in the opening like this, 7 cubits. Inside is the complete tabernacle on the side westward. Dig cubits 17 in the arch, which is the chamber of the high priest. And by the way, the scroll also contains a description of the tabernacle's location within the cave. Here is the tabernacle on the 3rd level and all the pieces of gold. Well, JR, it is in this Cave of the Column that Vendell Jones has been digging. And he says all he has to do now is sink a camera, use one of the miniature television cameras on a pole down through an exploratory hole, and he'll actually be able to view these artifacts.
Fascinating.
It is.
Now, if he does, of course, this program is being done in July. So if in August he finds it, we will let you know. The interesting thing here is that this cave that he's talking about seems to be described in the Copper Scroll. And also, he says that this tabernacle is set up inside. Now, you know, Gary, when the Babylonians came, and this was during the days of Jeremiah, when the Babylonians came, the Chronicles tells us that they took off all the treasures of the temple, vessels of gold, silver, and so on, and took them off to Babylon. But we're talking about Solomon's temple treasures. But the Mosaic treasures are not listed. So it's entirely possible that the Mosaic tabernacle, or even the Tabernacle of David, could be hidden away and were not taken off into Babylon.
Now, in the histories of the Maccabees, Jeremiah's exploits are written about in 2 Maccabees 2, 1 through 8. And I'm going to read a portion of that. Don't have time to read it all. But on his journey down to Mount Nebo, it says, Jeremiah found a cave dwelling. He carried the tent, the ark, the incense altar into it, and then blocked up the entrance. Some of his companions came to mark out the way, but were unable to find it. When Jeremiah learned of this, he reprimanded them, saying, "This place shall remain unknown until God finally gathers his people together and shows mercy to them. And then the Lord will bring these things to light again, and the glory of the Lord will appear with the cloud, as it was seen both in the time of Moses and when Solomon prayed that the shrine might be worthily consecrated." Now, J.R., this is believable to me. When I read this episode, this historical event in Maccabees, it doesn't sound like something that's confabulated. It really sounds like something Jeremiah would have said. Leave your hands off this. Don't touch it. It's hidden. It'll be revealed in the latter day. And it exactly coincides with the ideas mentioned in Amos 9 and in Acts 15 by James.
There is that possibility. However, Gary, in verse 11 of Amos 9, we have, "In that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, close up the breaches thereof." The same thing we talked about in Acts 15. But you back up to verse 7, he says, "Are you not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel?" And he says, "Have I not brought up Israel out of the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Syrians from Kir?" There is at least that possibility that the Ark of the Covenant was taken off down into Africa. So we don't know if the Ark is going to be found in a cave out near the Qumran, or if it was returned back in, say, 1986 from Ethiopia. We know this. The Sanhedrin is preparing for rebuilding the tabernacle, or setting up some kind of temple worship on the Temple Mount. And they have, it seemed like a divine call, a go-ahead, to construct this prefabricated temple so that they can set it up. They've already built the tools of the temple, all the golden vessels, the silver vessels, the high priest garments, everything is ready. All they need is the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle, or Tabernacle of David, or this prefab building that they're building. And it's possible this prefab building would be big enough to house the old tent.
Absolutely. Now, we're mentioning this at this time. This may or may not happen in the next few months. We mention it simply because there's such great excitement about it in the land of Israel, among the Sanhedrin themselves, Vendel Jones, the rabbis of Safed, the Kabbalists, all the rabbis who study the books, are all very excited, saying, "This is the time." Now, to me, that's worth watching, J.R. This makes it worthwhile watching.
It does, doesn't it?
There's just nothing more exciting than this to me. And I want to mention, too, J.R. actually brought this to my attention before we did this program today. He suggested that maybe Jeremiah's exploits were kind of a cover story for the Ark. In other words, he said, well, I took the Ark down this way, when in fact it may have been over that way. So,
well, you know, the opening verses of 2 Maccabees says, "Hello to all you Jews in Egypt." So the book was written to the Jews in Egypt, telling about hiding the Ark of the Covenant over in Mount Nebo. My thinking is there is at least the possibility that the Ark was in Egypt, and they were sending a message down to the Jews in Egypt that it was a cover story.
So the Ark could have well gone down into Egypt and Ethiopia, as has been described elsewhere. At the same time, Jeremiah could have taken the Tabernacle of David over toward the Cave of the Column. But the one thing we do know is that when it comes to covering up incredible secrets, the Jews are second to none. They know how to keep a secret.
But I like a treasure hunt, don't you?
Oh, yes.
And one of these days, though, something spectacular is going to occur. I'm convinced that the Tabernacle of David will be brought out into the light, and the Ark of the Covenant, and that they will form the basis for the Tribulation temple, which has to be there so that the Antichrist can commit the abomination of desolation. That would be 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Absolutely. There has to be a tribulation temple in place. I believe we're seeing the precursor events right now. This makes it all very, very exciting.
And the nice thing about it is Psalm 105 happens to be one of the songs they sang when they brought the Ark of the Covenant up under David's administration and set up the Tabernacle of David. So keep your eyes on Jerusalem. Could happen this year. We'll be back in just a moment.